The chair will now recognize the honorable gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the trial of Slobodan Milosevic threatens U.S. sovereignty. The fact that this trial can be carried out in the name of international justice should cause all Americans to cast a wary eye on the whole principle of the UN War Crimes Tribunal. The prosecution of Milosevic, a democratically elected and properly disposed leader of a sovereign country, could not be carried out without full U.S. military and financial support. Since we are the only world superpower, the UN court becomes our court under our control. But it's naive to believe our world superpower status will last forever. The precedents now being set will one day surely come back to haunt us. The U.S. today may enjoy dictating policy to Yugoslavia and elsewhere around the world, but danger lurks ahead. The administration adamantly and correctly opposes our membership in the Permanent International Criminal Court because it would have authority to exercise jurisdiction over U.S. citizens without the consent of the U.S. government. But how can we, with a straight face, support doing the very same thing to a small country in opposition to its sovereignty, courts, and constitution? This blatant inconsistency and illicit use of force does not go unnoticed and will sow the seeds of future terrorist attacks against Americans or even war. Money, as usual, is behind the Milosevic's extradition. Bribing Serbian Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić, a U.S.-sponsored leader with hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars, prompted strong opposition from Yugoslavia Prime Minister Zoran Zajic and Yugoslavian President Vojislav Koštunica. A Belgrade historian, Alexa Dilhaus, was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "We sold him for money and we won't really get very much for it. The U.S. is the natural leader of the world, but how does it lead? This justifies the worst American instincts, reinforcing this bullying mentality," close quote. Milosevic obviously is no saint, but neither are the leader of the Croats, the Albanians, or the KLA. The NATO leaders who vastly expanded the death and destruction in Yugoslavia with 78 days of bombing in 1999 are certainly not blameless. The $1.28 billion promised the puppet Yugoslavian government is to be used to rebuild the cities devastated by U.S. bombs. First, the American people are forced to pay to bomb, kill innocent people, and destroy cities, and then they are forced to pay to repair the destruction, while orchestrating a UN kangaroo court to bring the guilty to justice at La Hague. For all this to be accepted, the press and the internationalists have had to demonize Milosevic to distance themselves from the horrors of others, including NATO. NATO's airstrike assisted the KLA in cleansing Kosovo of Serbs in the name of assisting Albanian freedom fighters. No one should be surprised when that is interpreted to mean tacit approval for Albanian expansionism in Macedonia. While terrorist attacks by former members of the KLA against Serbs are ignored, the trial of the new millennium, the trial of Milosevic, enjoys daily support from the NATO-U.S. propaganda machine. In our effort to stop an independent-minded and uncooperative with the international community, president of a sovereign country, U.S. policy was designed to support an equally, if not worse, organization, the KLA. One of the conditions for ending the civil war in Kosovo was the disbanding of the KLA. But the very same ruthless leaders of the KLA, now the Liberation Army of Kosovo, are now leading the insurrection in Macedonia without NATO lifting a finger to stop it. NATO's failed policy that precipitated the conflict now raging in Macedonia is ignored. The UN War Tribunal in La Hague should insult the intelligence of all Americans. This court currently can only achieve arrest and prosecution of leaders of poor, small, or defeated nations. There will be no war criminals brought to The Hague from China, Russia, Britain, or the United States, no matter what the charges. But someday this approach to world governing will backfire. The U.S. already has suffered the humiliation of being kicked off the Human Rights Commission and the Narcotics Control Commission. Our arrogant policy and attitude of superiority will continue to elicit a smoldering hatred toward us, and out of sheer frustration will motivate even more terrorist attacks against us.
The time of the gentleman has expired.